Welcome to Fall for the Book 2020. These free online events run from September through November. You can find the full schedule at fallforthebook.org. And be sure to follow us on Crowdcast. You can do that by clicking the Fall for the Book icon above the window and then click follow. If you'd like to buy one of these books, there is a button on the screen that will allow you to purchase these books from these poets. Thank you for joining us all today for this conversation between poets Nicole Tong and Kimiko Hahn. I'm Kimber Crane with Arts Fairfax, the designated local arts agency for Fairfax County. I manage our 5 grant programs and the Fairfax Poet Laureate program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Hahn and Kimiko Hahn. Nicole Tong is the inaugural Fairfax Poet Laureate, and her debut collection of poetry, How to Prove a Theory, won the 2017 Jean Feldman Prize. The poems in this collection are a meditation on grief, memory, and human resilience. Tong is the recipient of fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Vermont Studio Center, and George Mason University, where she received her MFA. Tong served as the inaugural writer-in-residence at the Pope Leahy House, a Frank Lloyd Wright property, and her writing has appeared in journals such as the American Book Review, Calyx, Cortland Review, and the Alabusha Review, among others. Her term began in April 2020. She was selected by a distinguished jury of poets and literary luminaries. She will serve a 2-year term, and this is one of her first public events. Kimiko Hahn's most recent collection of poetry, Foreign Bodies, published by W.W. Norton in 2020, is an exploration of how objects possess everything from an intimate moment to current events. Among her other works are The Unbearable Heart, which won the American Book Award, and Earshot, which was awarded the Theodore Roethke Memorial Poetry Prize, and an Association of Asian American Studies Literature Award. Hahn's other honors include a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Penn Volker Award, and the Shelley Memorial Prize. Hahn is the Distinguished Professor of the MFA program in Creative Writing and Literary Translation at Queens College City University of New York. And before we started, I want to add a thank you again to Kimiko Hahn, who was one of the distinguished jurors for the National Student Poets Program, which I once managed in a past life, which I think is karma, because I again find myself in the company of 2 distinguished poets. Both have many things in common, as you will see shortly. Nicole?
Thank you so much, Kimber, for that introduction, and thank you to Kimiko for joining us, for your presence today, and thanks to Fall for the Book for hosting us. Finally, thank you to everyone watching from home. I'm so honored to be here and that you're sharing your time with us. I'll start with a few poems from How to Prove a Theory. Theory for the Living. My skirt bursts into cloud. Some birds fly away and take with them the land's color. For decades, I imagine everything is left to age and ash. This is not the work of weather. Grief is a color you can't see through, can never quite get to divisions of things. Wasn't I present to close the barn door? How did need escape me? Wasn't there always milk in the air covering remains until nothing died anymore? Won't the crows come back? Didn't the others come to our aid? Couldn't the maps save us, tell us where? Was this the first time I was shattered, remade as the still of snapshot? I can't say why some birds didn't fly, can't name one good reason for which things stay. As Kimber said, the book is really a meditation on grief, and there are really two types of poems in the book. Theory poems like this one, Theory for the Living, and a series of hypotheses. And so I'm using the language of science to approach abstractions like grief and memory. And so thank you. If you have questions in the audience as I read or as Kimiko reads, or even as I'm asking questions of Kimiko, I welcome you to enter those into the chat and we will get to them later in our event. All right. Maternal theory. Following each low-wage paycheck, I buy one outfit for a baby I don't have, a girl I would call Lily. There are onesies, holiday shirts, sweaters smocked with the cutest animals in the kingdom. It's unlucky to want something so badly, scolds a friend who offers me charms for the superstitious and freshly roasted coffee to counter my practice. I give up running, try willing my once asthmatic body into womb. I store tiny clothes under the bed, sleep soundly on top of them, as if whispering a wish into fruition. Years and years I wait for Lily to announce herself like the trumpet of her namesake. I thought I would share a hypothesis poem since I've shared many theories. So, hypothesis. The way words are fixed, words become maps, become backbone or railroad tracks. Hypothesis. I'm so alive, I leave you shaking in my boots, the soles lie. I remove them, run through what's hollow. And the last poem I'll share is called Over-Leveraged Theory. Over-leveraged theory. I'd call you by name, I'd say my, but the sea is too wide for this lifetime. I'd say vehicles matter most. I'd say the way to safety is concrete with things, twine, a receding tide, a could-be continent of islands punctuating what's beneath. Imagine heaven, a fairy tale reversing itself. Ducks gather above, darkness below erases the boots on our feet. Our house becomes a boat on its side. The dancing and music stop. Long after your last reply, I'm left with this fragment of alphabet, the V our arms make with you on my back. I know neither how to hold you up nor where to safely place you down. This process called trust keeps happening. Thank you. And now to hear Kimiko's poems. Kimiko Hahn.
Hello, everyone. And thank you, everyone at Fall for the Book, including Susie Rigdon-Williams. Also, thank you, Kimber Crane and Nicole Tong. And congratulations, Nicole, for having this inaugural event, for your poet laureateness. And I look forward to chatting with you on the subject of living poets. I think that's becoming even more crucial as our communities are isolated figuratively and in reality. I think we need books and arts to bring us back to the table together. I'm going to read a little bit from my book, Foreign Bodies. And as Kimber said, it came out this year, so I'm trying to bring it around remotely as it so happens. Excuse me. When I was working on the poems that would be eventually become the collection, Foreign Bodies, my father's health took a sharp decline. His dementia worsened. And after he died around this time, my sister and I were left with a house that he had filled with stuff. Things that he had hoarded from valuable art that he himself had made and bought and collected, as well as plastic bags and junk mail. We always thought that his saving things had to do with being a child of the Depression. But we realized that after his death, we realized he was really in the grips of something personal, and we don't know what that was. In any case, what was going on around me at the time, his decline and also the hoarding and collecting, and then after that, cleaning and putting things in storage. Of course, all this stuff impacted on what I was writing about. Of course. So my view towards collecting things, and I do collect things myself, and consumerism and just plain looking at objects took a slight shift and became sharpened in different ways. I'm going to begin with this very modest poem about my dad's hoarding. And the only thing you might need to know about it is that some birds, when they feed their young, the parents will chew up the food and then place it in the little baby bird's mouth. The nest in winter. In the father's shadowy hoard, pillows belch feathers across mattress and floors. What was an oriental rug, now a carpet of scat, gone astray socks, calendars from rescue shelters, angling for checks. There's nothing to toss among the vivid tethers to mother, maybe my mother, maybe father's. There's no margarine container, any less pathetic than a netsuke from Kyoto. No expired sardine tin less urgent than a dozen aerograms. No receipt less intimate than their honeymoon photo, snapped in the local aquarium. The adult daughter takes in the spew, pablum that a bird feeds its nestlings. Excuse me. I'm going to read a poem called A Dusting. I wrote this poem in part as a way of arguing with my husband, who says he doesn't understand when I say that one day I will be nothing with my mother. So I've been thinking a lot about dust by way of answering and explaining myself. A dusting. However, mother has reappeared, say, as motes on a feather duster. Scientists say the galaxy was created thus. This daybreak, she seeds a cumulus cloud. Wherever mother is bound, she's joined ashes, ashes, or dirt underfoot, or bits off Tower North and Tower South. Repurpose does not arrive whole cloth. From stardust, dust bunnies, dust bowl, dust unto dust, to Rookeisers, silica, Whitman's boot soles, and Dunbar's what of his love, what of his lust, to samples that astronomers collect, dust is where the sparrow bathes herself. Not a cloud in the sky, mother says as she hangs the laundry outside. Father paints en plein air, and we girls sweep crumbs under the rug. This summer, father sees inferno everywhere. No dust-ups from little girls. As a consequence, one scribbled on the dustbins of history and the other dusted for fingerprints. And the mother lived in a vacuum. Inside the senseless corridors, the daughter cannot respire. Inside the vulgar cosmic, the mother cannot be revived in steaming, streaming, wet traffic. Nowadays, I lie down in the sunlight to see my mama moting around as sympathetic ash. Yes, one morning, whether misty or yellow, I'll be soot with her, elegiac and original. The title of my collection is Foreign Bodies, and the title came from a longer poem that I was working on, and you can see these little objects. These are all actual objects that a doctor, Dr. Chevalier Quixote Jackson, collected when he took them out of children's upper respiratory system. You can see all 2,000 of these objects that he hoarded and then donated to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, now called the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. I became fascinated by the doctor's biography, and I wrote a long poem about him. And then I started thinking, what does foreign body mean? It means obviously these objects that children swallow, but it also means a body that is foreign, like my mother's body, perhaps, or certainly my grandmother who grew up, who was born in Japan and grew up in Hawaii. So what are we talking about when we turn over that phrase, foreign bodies? So this is the poem, Foreign Body. This is a poem on my other's body. I mean, my mother's body. I mean the one who saved her braid of blue-black hair in a drawer. I mean the one I could lean against as in insistence, fuzzy dress of wuzzy one, red lipstick one, rubber gloves one, her one to me, badger, or so I heard. The one body I write on, her sun-flecked body, as she bathed in the afternoon. Was I 5? It was summer, then winter, where today I call the unlocked bathroom to mind. I cannot leave her body alone, which is how I found mother, escaping the heat of a 1950s house. Father on a ladder with blowtorch to scrape the paint off the outside. Badger. The sun in those suburbs simmered the tar roof over our rooms in the town where the wasps lived, inside paper cells beneath eaves and roots. They sing, I mean sting, very much the wasps. Now I'm 60, sweet as dried papaya, my hair a bit tarnished, my inmost null. Memory is falling away, as if an image shattered to shards, then recollected for a kaleidoscope. I click the pieces into sharp arrangement, bad, bad, girl, girl. In turn, a daughter turns sovereign. I'm going to end with this shorter poem. I was sitting at a dinner table with a group of women poets. Most of them I hadn't met before. We were chatting, comparing notes about poetry and writing and where one finds the time to write. And one woman asked me if I ever write occasional poems written for particular occasions. And I said, yeah, I do. And then later on, I was writing a poem specifically using a New York Times article having to do with immigration and a particular incident. So I entitled this, A Daughter, after being asked if I write the occasional poem. After leaving Roxruja, after crossing Mexico with a coyote, after reaching at midnight that barren New Mexico border, a man and his daughter looked to Antelope Wells for asylum and were arrested. After forms read in Spanish to the Mayan-speaking father, after a cookie but no water, after the wait for the lone bus to return for their turn, after boarding, after the little girl's temperature spiked, she suffered 2 heart attacks, vomited, and stopped breathing. After medics revived the 7-year-old at Lordsburg Station, after she was flown to El Paso, where she died, the coroner examined the failed liver and swollen brain. Then Jacqueline's chest and head were stitched up, and she returned to Guatemala in a short white coffin to her mother, grandparents, and dozens of women preparing tamales and beans to feed the grieving. In Quechua, W-E means mouth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those poems. I have several questions for you, Kimiko.
Sure.
So I hope we could go ahead and get started.
Yes.
And if you watching at home have questions, you can enter them into the chat. I see so many of your sweet messages. So thank you for your messages to Kimiko and me. We appreciate them. If you have questions, I'm happy to parlay those as well. My first question is, I think that readers and people listening today would be surprised if they hadn't read our work. How much science is in both of these collections?
It's true.
What are these poets doing with their theories and their foreign bodies and their study of doctors? So I wonder where that interest kind of came from in you. I was a chemistry major before I started studying English. And so where are your points of interest and intersection with this collection, Kimiko?
A friend has called me a bit of a magpie. I write about anything that sort of crosses my path. And I'm just the opposite of you, actually. I was never a good science student. But the language of science is really exotic to my ear. So for other people, Japanese culture might be exotic. The language, the words might be exotic. It isn't to me. It's what I grew up with. But science is exotic. And by that, I mean, it captures my attention. And oftentimes language is the first thing that gets my attention, and then the subject matter. So that's how I came to it. And also reading the science section of the New York Times, which is made for people like me to explain really interesting stuff to people who have no idea what what a synapse is.
I love that. I'm thinking about the poems in this collection and just how varied they are in terms of their form, how rich the collection is in terms of its craft. And so I know when I'm writing a poem, I have a tell that I'd like to share with everybody today. And that is, there are poems that are so tiny and short. And these are poems that I did not write at a computer. I actually voice recorded them while running. And so I'm a distance runner. I run marathons and ultra marathons. And so I'll flip to the side of the trail and turn on the voice memo when I start to hear music. And you can tell that in contrast with a poem, you know, where the margins look like they were made in Microsoft Word, because they were.
Right.
But your poems start similarly. The poems seem to begin very economically, and then by the end of the collection, you've burst into prose, blossomed into prose. So how do you make those decisions about how a poem is ultimately going to appear on the page, how it's going to look?
First of all, I love your description of sort of stepping aside for a moment and writing your poems. I love that image very much. It feels like a ritual, actually, a ritual act to step outside of one's life for a moment to do that. I think that a lot of what poets end up doing comes from our experiences in reading a lot and coming to understand craft by rereading what we love and even what we don't love, but really engaging as explorers. So a lot of what I do is through intuition. I will print out and spread on the floor the pages that I have of a long poem, or on a screen. I'll do those multiple page things so I can see what the poem looks like. So it visually hopefully breaks open or becomes quieter sometimes, becomes more laconic. And then the ear also. In the poems in this particular collection, I was very interested in repetition and the kind of repetition one finds in sonnet sequence, A Crown of Sonnets, where in the final sonnet in A Crown of Sonnets, that final one is built on lines from the previous ones. So I was interested in seeing what would happen if I wrote a sequence and if the last section was built from what came before. So maybe that's your sense of kind of breaking open a little bit. But I was playing with form and what I've learned from other poets of the past and who are kicking around today.
Tell us, Kimiko, who is the first living poet you read? Who's the first poet you read that was still alive when you read that poet?
Wow. Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Ezra Pound was still alive. And then later, Adrienne Rich, Louise Glick, I think Lucille Clifton, certainly, and Gwendolyn Brooks. So a lot of poets. I didn't think of them as being still alive. I just kind of read whatever I could get my hands on. I'm interested in asking you that question.
James Kimbrell, when his book, The Gatehouse Heaven, came out, I was a freshman in college. And before that, I had never read a living poet.
Wow.
And so I read this book where, the title poem is describing his father's experience in the Vietnam War and, with mental illness. And a lot of things started clicking for me. Like, here is a poet not writing about a flower in a field. Maybe this is of interest.
Yeah.
And at the time, I wanted to be a doctor or maybe a psychologist. And so the interaction of the speaker and the real world was a real change, a real deviation for me. And so I think I'll parlay this into the next question. Just why should, people listening to this crowdcast event and people watching from home and students in classrooms read poets like you and I who are still alive?
There's something about you and your description that I like so much. Kind of just stepping outside for a moment, stepping outside your running, literally running, and training and so forth. Stepping off the path for a minute to record, to write down your thoughts and feelings. In a larger sense, that's what poets do, right? So if one is reading the work of poets today, one is stepping off the path with them.
I love that.
At that moment, right? We're right there joining us to pause as we have to write down and craft our expression and our experiences, and hoping that someone will join us in what we have to express. And I think that for people who are writing, I'll speak for myself. I know that when I read living poets, I feel that I'm given a certain kind of permission to do things. As you just, again, going back to what you just said, it sounds like you got a certain kind of permission from that first book that you read. It's like, oh, you can write about that? Okay. I didn't know that.
Right. Like, poetry was separate from the real world and real life until suddenly, the poet was in the room with me and I got to ask questions. Maybe I felt I wasn't quite equipped to do this thing that we're now doing. My sister and I are the first generation in our families to go to college. So it's a big deal to hear from a professor, this is something that you could do. This is a possibility for you. Right. I think you might really love this life. And I do. as it happens, maybe I would have been a terrible doctor. Maybe I would have been a good one. But I really love, teaching high students on the call. And I really love just wrestling, using language to try to understand what I don't already know. That is a real gift. And
well, I was just to add to that, when I teach literature, like specifically like an introduction to poetry literature class, sometimes, or I should say usually, I start with a contemporary poem and then work my way back to to John Donne's The Flea or something, and then a student will go, that's amazing. John Donne. I had one student, an accounting major, say to me once after class, did he write more poems like that? And would they be in the library? And I was like, yes, yes, go to the library and read John Donne. But I don't think he would have gotten there if he hadn't come to John Donne through Yusuf Komunyakaa or Louise Glick or another poet, right? So right. that was a way for them to enter through current poetry.
You're right. And the flea, talk about a common argument. So we have an audience question, which is exciting.
Okay.
As poets, we all write and connect uniquely to our own and to others' work. Is there a particular poet you compare yourself with or look up to?
Oh. I certainly don't compare myself to Emily Dickinson. I would never, I would never do that. But since May 2nd, I have been reading an Emily Dickinson poem almost every day, a couple weeks hiatus here and there. Why? One reason is because it took me a long time to get over a kind of intimidation and feeling intimidated by her work. I loved it, but I did not understand what the heck she was doing. But it took me a while. I am nothing if not stubborn, persistent, and I was given a book by a colleague and friend called Dickinson, Selected Poems and Commentaries by the scholar Helen Vendler. So during the lockdown and beyond, I have been using this book by Vendler and every day reading a commentary and a poem. And it's become a daily practice for me. I'm almost at the end of several hundred of these poems. Yeah, and I tell you this anecdote because I consider myself an apprentice to Emily Dickinson. I consider Emily Dickinson a kind of shamaness, that she performs a kind of magic that I want to learn. So I'm not going to be anything like her, but if I can learn some of her tricks, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that by reading these close readings that are really about craft. They're not just about what the poem means. They're really as much for a writer about how Emily Dickinson was able to perform this magic.
That's wonderful. I would say Emily Dickinson is, my fairy godmother of poetry also. That I probably wouldn't be a poet if I didn't turn to her. And after that is Lucille Clifton. I just think she is the end all be all in terms of being able to take something so complicated and so rich and to offer something that seems so simple.
Yes,
I always aspire to write. I think poems like "Blessing the Boats" and those are really perfect poems with not one unneeded word. And so I always sort of aspire to that kind of economy and precision.
Yes, I agree.
There's a craft question for you, Kimiko. Do you feel like experimenting with form helps you articulate difficult emotional content?
I think so. I am a child of the 60s and 70s and 80s, long adolescence. And so when I was beginning to write, I'll say most of my contemporaries as well, we didn't write in form. That was considered too bourgeois, So I came to form late. I came to form mostly Japanese form in college when I was studying Japanese and Japanese literature. And then much later, I came to writing Western forms. So in the past few years, I've been crazy about writing sestinas, which I'd been trying to write for more than a decade, and I could not. And I think what writing in a form like the sestina does for me is the sestina tricks me I'm using the word trick again, tricks me into investigating, exploring certain areas of my unconscious. And isn't that fun? Usually, like, how did I get here? But that's the fun of art.
That is, I love the reliability of the Sestina. You know where you're going, you know where you're coming back to.
Yes. Yes.
There's an audience question, two actually, and then we'll probably sign off. But the first of the two is, do you revise, revamp, or redo most of your poems?
Absolutely. Every last one. Absolutely. And for years. The last poem I read, that occasional poem, there was not as much revising because it's a structure I wanted to try for a while, and the material was right there, and there was a kind of social pressure for me to write this, and it's a very short poem. Excuse me. So I did revise it, not quite as much, but my other poems I can spend years on revising.
I'll answer the same. Everything is a revision, and very few poems are the way that I imagined them when they first arrived to a piece of paper or to a computer screen. And in fact, I actually wrote the first poem in the collection 10 years before it came out.
There you go.
And then life happens, right? And the books you're writing becomes something else entirely. And for me, it was a series of losses. And so the book really became about how to talk about loss in a way that wasn't so sentimental or so uniquely personal to me, something a little bit more universal. And I hope the theory form lets me do that, sort of putting these things more theoretically. Thanks for that question. And then the last question, there's a question about how I became a writer instead of a chemistry major. And I'll just give a shout out to my poetry professor, Alan Michael Parker, who said, you're meant to be a professor and you will be doing this. And I said, no, I will not. One of us was right. And then the last question, how can novices dip our feet into poetry? I'm gonna answer that and then give you the last word, Kimiko, before we sign off today. I would say, start by read Living Poets. There's a beautiful blog by the educator Melissa Smith, to whom I owe a great debt for my tenure project, Poetry Lives Here. She houses a blog called Teach Living Poets. And so if you are a teacher watching this and you're looking at where to start in introducing your students to contemporary poets like Kimiko and myself, go to her site, Teach Living Poets. There's a beautiful Living Poets digital database. You can hear poets, connect with them on social media, and there are all sorts of richness happening there. And if you're interested in writing, turn to your community. Look at opportunities, workshops like the Writers Center houses and other readings like Politics and Prose, independent bookstores, and even local reading series. So Kimiko, what do you think of that same question? What should a novice do if they want to dip their toe into poetry?
Well, I love the absolutely practical answer that you gave, and I was, as you were saying, I'm like, oh, what can I add to that in terms of real concrete suggestions. I would only add, and I'm sorry to keep referring, Nicole, to your running metaphor. I would only add that we all need to step off of the path every now and then and let ourselves write. So if you want to write, give yourself that. Sit in the parking lot for 5 minutes and write something down. Maybe it's a poem, maybe it isn't. But you have to start somewhere, and it can be at any age. A lot of Chinese poets, classic Chinese poets, didn't really start writing until they were retired. So there's hope for everyone. And thank you for that
so
question.
much.
Thank you so much.
Much, audience, for your questions. Thank you,
Yeah.
Paul, for the book. Thank you, Kimiko, for joining us. And thanks at home for watching. We've had a wonderful time with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.